Good evening, everybody. Happy Thursday. We're 1 week away. We're not 1 week away, 1 day away from Friday, so we're almost at the weekend. I'm your host of the Jet Fuel Podcast, the official Winnipeg Jets podcast of GShow Productions. Graham, the GShow Forsyth, joining you here on this September 21st date. My apologies for not getting this episode out yesterday. Was feeling under the weather and, just wasn't feeling up to the standard that I feel like I need to be to do this show. So the Jet Fuel podcast for episode 3 will be returning to its usual scheduled date next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Central Time. But I'm excited for this one, folks. A lot to talk about as training camp has officially been underway for the Winnipeg Jets. It was technically day 2 of training camp for them today. But it's, I believe it was the first day they started skating with each other. This show brought to you by Make Canada Fasteners and Tools. Be sure to visit their website at makecanadafasteners.shop. Visit their store locations in Brandon and Winnipeg today. It's your one-stop shop for all of your industrial needs. And we're also brought to you by Terrico, another official sponsor of the Jet Fuel podcast here on GShow Productions, serving Manitoba producers for over 80 years. If you want to check out their wonderful products, be sure to visit their website, as you guys can see right there on the top right hand side of your screen, terrico.ca. But let's get into some news here right away, because there's quite a bit in terms of the opening day of training camp. Starting off with some not so great news, though. Nikolai Ehlers, as reported by Mike McIntyre, left the ice after a few drills this morning, skating with Team Solani, since the team is split up into 2 different teams to start off training camp here, and will be so throughout the entirety of training camp. But apparently an update from Rick Bowness saying that Nick Ehlers has been dealing with neck spasms that first flared up last night. He tried it out today, but then left the ice early, per Mike McIntyre. He will be kept out of tomorrow's skate as a precaution. So, I think that's the right move early on in training camp. You don't want to risk too much with a guy like Nikolai Ehlers, a guy that I think is going to be a huge part of the success the Jets have this season, if they do have any type of success to go far and try to, have success come playoff time with that forward group. He's the best creator, in my opinion, on this Winnipeg Jets team. In terms of the chances he creates offensively, he makes his line mates better, and he's electrifying to watch with the speed and the vision he has, the creativity. So, hoping for a speedy recovery for Nikolai Ehlers. But into some solid news here in terms of something that has happened with the Winnipeg Jets. Colby Barlow has signed a 4-year deal on his rookie contract. His entry-level deal, 3-year deal actually, for the 2023 first-round pick. They announced the signing earlier today. This deal is going to carry an annual average value of $1.2 million per Sportsnet. The Jets, of course, selecting Barlow as their first-round pick this year at 18th overall, and he had a heck of a season in the OHL with the Owen Sound Attack, putting up 79 points for 46 goals, 33 assists in 59 games played. One of the top prospects the Jets have in their prospect pool at this point, so looking forward to it, to see the future of Colby Barlow here. And then another signing for the Winnipeg Jets that was announced, not as recent, is the signing of Declan Chisholm. Chisholm signed a 1-year, 2-way contract with the Winnipeg Jets on September 13th. Per Sportsnet, the deal is carrying an annual average value in that 1 year of $775,000. Chisholm is 23 years old. He spent 2 games with the Winnipeg Jets in 2 seasons ago, I guess, in 2021-2022. A guy that I think has been really solid at the AHL level for the farm team for the Jets, the Manitoba Moose. So great to have him here on a one-year deal, hoping that he stays for longer and becomes a potential part of this future decor in the future, because he definitely has shown he can play a solid two-way game at the AHL level. And in the 2 games he played with the Jets in 2021-2022, I thought he looked pretty solid and pretty promising. So there's some good news, some bad news to open up this year's training camp. I had Scott Billeck, beat writer for the Winnipeg Jets, sports reporter for the Winnipeg Sun, on the show on Monday to talk about the Young Stars Classic, how the Jets prospects fared there, as well as talking about the headlines heading into this year's training camp. Take a listen after this transition here to start off the Jet Fuel Podcast Episode 2, brought to you by Mid Canada Fasteners and Tools, as well as Terrico. And special guest joining me on this edition of the Jet Fuel Podcast for Episode 2 to start things off here. It's Scott Billeck, Winnipeg Jets beat writer and sports reporter for the Winnipeg Sun. He's also a member of the Professional Women's Hockey League. Scott, thanks for taking the time and coming on to do this. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, no, I'm doing good, man. On the eve here of Jets training camp. So another season and another just looking forward to it. It's been a good summer and nice to get back to the rink.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say that, I mean, for the team, I feel like it was a solid summer. I mean, there's questions if they could have done more, what they could have done to add to this team moving forward. But you've been busy. I know that, in preparation for this season. You had a chance to cover the team while they were playing at the Young Stars Classic in Penticton, British Columbia. The Jets coming away with a 1-2 record on the weekend at that tournament. Talk about your thoughts from the prospects that went there and the tournament as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the prospects tournament's an interesting animal, right? Like it's there's players that obviously want to make an impression. There's a lot of
And my apologies there, folks. Just found an error within the stream here for one moment. I am going to we're gonna get this sorted out and have Scott Billeck right back here. But thank you to our lovely sponsors, of course, in Mid Canada Fasteners and Tools, as well as Terrico for sponsoring this edition of the episode. We'll be back with Scott in just a moment here, where we're going to restart the segment. Apologies about that. And special guest joining me on this edition of the Jet Fuel Podcast for Episode 2 to start things off here. It's Scott Billeck, Winnipeg Jets beat writer and sports reporter for the Winnipeg Sun. He's also a member of the Professional Women's Hockey League. Scott, thanks for taking the time and coming on to do this. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, no, I'm doing good, man. On the eve here of Jets training camp. So another season and another just looking forward to it. It's been a good summer and nice to get back to the rink.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say that, I mean, for the team, I feel like it was a solid summer. I mean, there's questions if they could have done more, what they could have done to add to this team moving forward. But you've been busy. I know that, in preparation for this season. You had a chance to cover the team while they were playing at the Young Stars Classic in Penticton, British Columbia. The Jets coming away with a 1-2 record on the weekend at that tournament. Talk about your thoughts from the prospects that went there and the tournament as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the prospects tournament's an interesting animal, right? Like it's there's players that obviously want to make an impression. There's a lot of players there that haven't really skated in that kind of setting. They go into it with 1, maybe 2 days, in the Jets case at least, of practice together, and then they're kind of thrown onto the ice and in game action, exhibition game action. And so you're wondering, okay, well, it's not like this team really has a set system to play. It's not like they're really playing anything. To me, I don't know. It's not a glorified beer league, because obviously these guys are, quite skilled. It's very much what you would expect to see from one of these skates that the teams do, kind of leading into training camps, where it's kind of an organized pro skate. That's kind of what it feels like every year, and so people are looking to see if guys are taking the next step. And save that for camp, is kind of how I kind of look at it. I mean, a lot of these guys, the most impressive stuff that they're going to do is going to come this week when training camp starts, and over the next couple of weeks. So but that's not to say there wasn't guys who stood out, guys that could have been better, let's say. To me, both goalies, Thomas Milic and Dominic DiVincentis, who started 2 games, they both played really well. They definitely got the shot volume against them in those games. Against Calgary in their final game, I really like Nikita Chibrikov. I like watching him play. I mean, he was finding open ice. He was shooting, which is something that you like to see from some of these young guys, because oftentimes they're looking to set up a play. Sometimes we've seen this in Jets camps before. Everybody's looking to make that perfect pass to set up a goal. Chibrikov looked really good. I thought, kind of moving around the ice, finding soft ice, finding holes for himself to take a shot. So he was good. I came into the whole thing looking at what is Elias Salmonson going to do there. I mean, he is the de facto, at least at this camp, the top prospect defenseman, right-handed shot, something that the Jets were really thin at in their prospect pool. I thought he had actually a pretty good tournament. So that's good to see. I mean, obviously all these guys that were in Penticton are on the training camp roster. At least all the Jets prospects, the ones that are signed. A lot of the Moose guys that have Moose AHL contracts are also going as well. So that'll be good to see them in kind of the training camp mode, where some of these guys are really doing their best not to get hurt at this tournament. I think that may have impacted Chaz Lucius's tournament. I didn't think he had the greatest tournament there, but you got to think with Chaz. I mean, here's a guy who hasn't really played any hockey since February after getting injured in Portland, having season-ending shoulder surgery. So what are you really expecting from him coming into this rookie tournament? I mean, even you could make the argument for camp. It's going to be a tough camp for him, because he's really just hasn't played a lot of hockey since then. He's obviously been skating, taking a little bit of contact, but the actual playing the game itself has been 7-8 months now that he's kind of been on the shelf, not really kind of doing anything. But I mean, I think we saw when he was sent down to Portland how good he can be. He had something like, I think it was like 16 points in 6 games, like quite good, obviously at the junior level, and should be. I mean, I think a large part of it with him and a guy like Brad Lambert, who was also at the Penticton tournament. Both of those guys, you expected last season to dominate junior, and they did when they were given their chance. Obviously Lambert went much further, the Memorial Cup final actually. Yeah. But obviously wasn't injured. So yeah, I mean, I look at the tournament, and I caught some flack on Twitter for saying it's not that, you don't expect a lot of things, and that's fine. I mean, I don't expect a lot of people these players to really be giving it their all. You saw that from maybe a guy like Terrell Bauer, who was really mixing it up out there and that sort of thing. But guys that, and we can argue about whether any of these guys really have a legitimate shot to make the Jets training camp, and maybe this would be a good segue into our next spot. But these guys just want to do it in front of Rick Bowness. They want to do it in front of the Jets coaching staff. Like, that's where they want to do it. And the last thing these guys want is to miss any sort of opportunity to do training camp. And so yeah, I mean, that's how we kind of look at it. The 1-2 record doesn't matter to me. None of that really kind of makes any difference. It's really a good tournament to get guys ready for training camp, and that's kind of how I look at it. So that's kind of I don't put enough stock really into the tournament, but I did like some of the performances that some of the guys definitely put on for sure.
Yeah, it's a tournament. I think you alluded to it, of course. It's a tune-up, for the prospects heading into training camp. And you also alluded to something that I wanted to bring up in terms of, they don't really have a set system. They're kind of going out there. It's more of an organized skate, like you were saying, and it's
Yeah.
more so for the fans to tune in and see what, is upcoming in the prospect line for their teams, and the Jets being one of them that played in this All Canadian Young Stars tournament. I think that, yeah, for Chaz Lucius, not playing hockey since the start of last year, getting the shoulder surgery. I think that in terms of the guy to make the Jets roster, I was talking to it with a buddy that was on the show last week. His game, I feel like, would fit potentially what the Jets could need in the bottom six of this team on the fourth line if he were to show out in training camp and preseason. But like you said, we'll have to wait and see what happens when he goes into playing in a contact situation. Like you said, he didn't entirely stand out in that
Mhm.
Young Stars tournament this past weekend, but totally agree with you in terms of DiVincenzo and Thomas Milic, both playing really well in this tournament. DiVincenzo, was making some acrobatic saves. Milic was solid in that performance where the team ended up going into a shootout and won the only game of the tournament. And I
Mhm.
think, it was a big tournament for a guy like you mentioned in Chibrikov, Nikita Chibrikov, who was the team's best forward, establishing himself as a guy that, could potentially make some noise come training camp. Good IQ, good vision. Also
Mhm.
love the game of Salamonson, who I think, like you said, at this point is looking like the Jets' best young prospect at defenseman. So there were some good moments for the Jets. Guys stood out, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's a tournament where nothing's really organized. It's just prospects trying to go out there and impress, I feel like. And there was a few for the Jets who went out and did that. Going into training camp, it starts this Thursday.
Mhm.
A day after this episode airs, there's going to be two teams at the start that are going to have split up into two teams in terms of Team Solani and Team Newmanen.
Yeah.
First preseason game for the Jets coming up on Sunday against the Edmonton Oilers on the 24th, then heading back to Winnipeg for the next day to play their first home game of the preseason against the Oilers. What would you say is the most intriguing storyline or lines heading into this year's training camp for this Winnipeg Jets team?
Yeah, and to me, there's a few of them. I think it starts down the middle. Who's this team's second line center? Is it Gabe Vilardi? Is it Cole Perfetti? Is it Vlad Domestikov? Like, I mean, it's an interesting spot because if we go back to the right after the free agency open, and that was the last time Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke, other than after Adam Lowry was named captain. But Cheveldayoff talked about Cole Perfetti, earning a chance to play in the position he was drafted in, which was center. So, I imagine, as we go into training camp here, the first line center is Mark Scheifele and the third line center is Adam Lowry. The fourth line center will figure it out. It could be any number of guys, I think, at this point, although I think you're probably looking at maybe a Kapari or somebody like that down there. But the second line center is the one for me that really kind of, okay, so who's it going to be? Because it does affect the rest of the lines. Like, is Cole Perfetti just going to play left wing on that line, and then they have Velarde and maybe Alex Iafallo there? Does Alex Iafallo play with Nino Niederreiter and Adam Lowry on the third line? So I think the first thing that you're going to be watching for on day one is kind of where on Thursday is where Rick Bowness has these lines set. That'll be the interesting thing to me. It feels like, based on what Rick Bowness said already, this team again is looking to win, and I don't think they're going to take a lot of time kind of sorting out who's playing with who. Like this was the same thing they did last year in training camp. Very much had lines kind of set throughout most of it, and they wanted to really implement their systems and all that. It's a different training camp because Rick Bowness doesn't have to come in and do a lot of that stuff this year. The systems are there. What they want to do on defense is there. He spoke a little bit last week when they announced Lowry as captain about this team wanting to start taking steps forward in some of the stuff that they already have, like, so starting to build off of the foundation they had last year. So that'll be interesting to see that. This team obviously still needs to get better at defense. Their metrics were a little bit better last year. Rick Bowness alluded to that, but it does need to take the next step if this team really wants to compete, past the first round, even into the playoffs, really. So that needs to happen. But yeah, to me, the biggest storyline going into camp really is, well, I mean, I guess there could be a couple big runs. I mean, what's it going to be like with Scheifele and Hellbuck there as, essentially lame ducks, going into the last year of the contracts, no extensions in place, that sort of thing. I mean, that's separate from maybe the on ice stuff. But I do think, to me, the first thing I'm looking for on Thursday is who's playing with who, and where it's going to go from there. And obviously, with 56 guys in camp, I can't remember the actual groups right off the top of my head right now. We just got them today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who's kind of with who there. To me, again, we might touch on the defense. I think it's already set. I don't think really anything's changing there. I don't think there's really anybody. Yeah, I think the thing you're looking for is who's the seventh defenseman, who's the eighth defenseman on this team, because this team is likely to carry eight defensemen into the season. So is that Stanley and Kyle Capobianco? Does Capobianco get put on waivers? And they maybe bring up, what do they do with Declan Chisholm, right? Like, I mean, I think there's some question marks on defense, what they're going to do with who they carry on this roster, who they are going to have to expose to waivers, because one of those guys has got to go on and they're going to have to figure it out. But yeah, to me, it's, what does this forward contingent look like now without Pierre-Luc Dubois, without Blake Wheeler? You're removing two guys that played such, a big role in this team last year in terms of where they played. So, in terms of production, even for both guys who were able to put up decent production. So where what's changed on forward? Because I think the only things that we really know right now are who the first and second line or first and third line centers are, and the fact that Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers are probably on the top line at this point with Scheifele. So yeah, to me, it's definitely what this forward contingent is going to look like, and how they've talked about all summer about how that Pierre-Luc Dubois trade at the end of June made this team deeper on forward. Well, we're going to see starting Thursday, what that depth looks like and how they kind of plan to use, how Rick Bowness kind of plans to deploy that depth and kind of maybe spread the wealth on this team, and something they haven't always been willing to do, or even, let's say, had the opportunity to do, just what the personnel they had. So yeah, that's probably the top storyline in my mind.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Who is going to fill that second line center role? On daily faceoffs, it's been shown that Belardi is slotted there. Obviously, that could change. We don't know until Thursday, and once camp gets going. Of course, Cole Perfetti, a natural center, coming in the position the Jets drafted him at. What was in terms of him being a centerman, and he's played wing for most of his time, or all of his time so far with
Pretty
the
much. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is the biggest thing the Jets need to figure out. They need to sort out. You got a first line center in Mark Scheifele there as long as he is here. And I honestly don't see him moving this season. I could be wrong on that, but my feeling is he's a Jet until the end of the year, and then we see what happens after. But I think there's strong chance of it being either Perfetti or Velarde, the guy that was brought in the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. And I said it on the show last week. I am in agreement in terms of I think that this is a deeper Jets team on paper up front with more options than we've seen in the past few years. Adding I follow having Niederreiter there as well. So I think there's more depth down the left side already, which is really nice. And yeah, I think you're bang on in terms of the D core being set already. Who's going to be that depth defenseman, that seventh or eighth defenseman? I think that Declan Chisholm is going to be looking to impress. I think that he could have a very strong camp. He's looked really good in the AHL, and he's been pretty good in his own end while playing in that league. So what type of camp does he have? I'm going to be very interested, as well as a guy like Billy Hanola, a guy that has been trying to take that next step, trying to take that next jump. I think at this point, he probably doesn't get into the Jets lineup. They should be looking to trade him and get value back for him. But yeah, I think that, who's going to fill the second line center role, like you talked about, it is going to be a huge question, because 1 and 3 are solidified right now. And I think who's going to potentially battle for a depth spot to potentially be that guy when, hey, the Jets have an injury, who can we plug into a lineup, who impressed during
Yep.
training camp? I think those are probably the three big things that, we're looking at heading into this year's Jets training camp coming up soon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's where I'm at there. I look at, you mentioned really, it's interesting, right? Because he's still got, he'll be waiver exempt this year, so he still can be sent down without any issues, and I think that hurts him. And it's not his fault. It's just the way that it goes and the way that this team kind of handles things like that. I think that their ability to send Billy down is he's going to have to put in a good camp if he wants to get in. It's so jammed on that left side, and I'm just looking at the roster right now. I mean, there's just so many guys there that if you're looking at just what this team is going to start with this season, on the left side, it's likely Morrissey, it's likely who am I saying, Brendan Dillon, and it's likely I'm missing. That's it, though. Dylan Samberg, right? And so, I'm just like, who's really taking a spot there? I mean, I think the easy one would be, okay, well, maybe Dylan Samberg is the guy that you could probably potentially fight for a job, but I think he sealed that up last year. I think it was very obvious come the playoff time. Yeah, he had his gaff there in the playoffs, but I don't think that really hurt him in the eyes of the coaching staff. I think he clearly had won that job down the stretch. Logan Stanley was injured for a lot of the season, played 19 games I think last year. Logan Stanley has definitely fallen out of I don't think there's going to be a three-way fight the way that it was kind of presented last year by Rick Bowness, where it was between Billy, Stanley, and Samberg. I think Samberg has really taken the reins on that, and partly just because he stayed healthy, and Billy can be sent down, and Logan Stanley barely played last year. So yeah, it'll be an interesting camp. I mean, you look at these groups, and I pulled them up. Maybe we're not going to really see exactly on the first day, what the lines look like, because you do have Scheifele and Ehlers in different groupings, and Velarde's and those guys are in a different group than, let's say, an IFL or a Perfetti. So it's going to be interesting kind of see where they do. But that's part of the way you have 56 guys in camp. I mean, that's basically it is two teams, right? It's two teams out there. So yeah, I'm interested to see that. Obviously they have, I think, 6 goalies on the roster. I think that's obviously the NHL goalies are set with Hellebuck and Lauren Brossoit coming back. I think Colin Delia, he'll be with the Moose with Salmonen. That leaves Milic in the ECHL this year, at least to start, and Dominic DiVincentis will go back to the OHL, obviously. For that, I don't think they have any worry in goal at this point, unless they do end up trading Hellebuck at some point, right? That offer could kind of come at any time, and if they were to do it, it doesn't seem like the team is interested at all, and they haven't really ever seemed interested in trading either of those guys. But obviously none of that stuff kind of came to fruition over the summer with trades, just given the flat cap, what teams were willing to give up, especially in Connor Hellebuck, what teams are actually going to spend on even franchise goalies going forward. That landscape has changed tremendously, to the point where it's very interesting that you have let's say the top 3 goalie in the world available for trade, to whoever the highest bidder was, and there wasn't a high enough bidder to kind of pry him out of Winnipeg. So that was an interesting thing over the summer. I would say the same about Scheifele. If you have a top line center, and there's teams out there that want a guy like that, but the fact that he wasn't moved, maybe there wasn't the offer out there for him. I think those things are interesting, and potentially kind of telling as to how obviously that they're going to start the camp, unless something happens in the next 48 hours. They're going to start the camp in Winnipeg and go from there. So yeah, it's interesting. There's a few storylines obviously to look forward to. But I do think this team, obviously Dubois, and we talked about this, Dubois and Wheeler being out, but for the most part, I think the defense is set, the goalies are set, and the forward lines, I mean, I think the forward personnel is for the most part set up until you get to the fourth line. Then you can start figuring out who's going to kind of make, I think David Gustafson's probably been pushed out of a spot completely at this point. Morgan Barron's probably a fourth line player now with Mason Appleton. So we'll see kind of how that pans out. Can a guy like, a Henry Niekkonen maybe push? I don't know. I just don't really see it at this point. I think, again, this team is really trying to, as they've said, win right now. Where does this leave Jansen Harkins too? That's another one. I mean, Jansen Harkins is, basically an afterthought last year after getting sent down. He got a couple of opportunities. I think he played 22 games with the Jets last year, but he never really kind of impressed. And you talked about maybe Billy being on the trading block. I think they've tried to trade Jansen Harkins, just hasn't really worked out. So I'll be interested to see kind of with him too. Jansen Harkins, one of those guys that often comes into camp and has a really good camp. It just never, it hasn't always translated into the regular season in terms of consistency with him. So, but again, I think what they did this summer and bringing in those three guys in that trade for Dubois really kind of pushed some guys that you think, okay, well, maybe they'll have a chance again in training camp. Really think that's kind of, stunted those opportunities for them, because you still got Axel Johnson Fjallby. He could be your 13th forward. I'm interested to see who that 13th forward becomes on this team. So yeah, there are plenty of storylines as there are in any training camp, but it's going to be interesting kind of how over the next little while, even heading into Sunday's game, kind of where these things start to kind of fall into place as we kind of gear up for the season. And what's it, 3 weeks now, 3 weeks or so till the regular season starts. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting as usual.
Yeah, and gonna be interesting for sure to see who that 13th forward are. I mean, yeah, I think the Jets have way more balance on paper throughout the lineup heading into this year. I'm most curious to see as well, how are they gonna sort out, that middle six, who's gonna play with who on the second line, who's gonna be that third line left winger. I feel like Lowry and Appleton, that's someone the Jets really like having together, and part of that defensive shutdown third line that they've built here in Winnipeg. But I think that, heading into this year for this Winnipeg Jets team, they're set up to win now, like you said. I don't know if the roster they have is going to be enough, but it's going to be interesting to see the camp that guys trying to make this team are going to have, how it's going to play out for those guys as the season goes along, as it progresses. Do the Jets move a prospect and a guy like Billy Enola? What happens to a guy like Logan Stanley? Does the saga end there? And could a guy like Morgan Barron solidify himself as that fourth line depth piece that the Jets have on that left side, knowing that it's so deep? Does Kupar, solidify himself as that reliable fourth line centerman at the end of the day? And I think one thing to note about, losing PLD and Wheeler losing their production, Gabe Billard scored 23 goals last year, was a bit streaky, dealt with some injuries. He was on pace for the same amount of goals almost as Dubois. And then Iafallo, I think he comes in, and yeah, Blake Wheeler put up a few more goals than him on average last season, but he put up 14. This is a guy that's reliable in his own end as well, where Blake Wheeler wasn't necessarily sometimes.
Yep.
So I think by making those moves, the Jets start fresh, and they're still in this type of win now mode with this roster, where it still lies all on Connor Hellebuck at the end of the day. And I think that the Jets improved so much last season because of Rick Bonus's his commitment to playing a more complete team game defense and
Yep.
defensive system in our own end. And I think that worked really well for the Jets for the most part. I just think that as the season went along last year, we saw that the roster on paper could only get them as far as they could, and we saw what happened down the stretch as well as in the playoffs. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of intriguing battles come training camp. It's going to be interesting to see who can crack this Jets lineup, who's going to be the depth players and the depth defensemen. Scott Billeck, Jets beat writer and sports reporter for the Winnipeg Sun, also a member of the Professional Women's Hockey League, joining this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast. Scott, great to have you on. Hope to do this again.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it. No, it was fun. Appreciate having me on. Yeah, definitely look forward to the next time.
For sure, Scott. You take care.
You too.
And Scott Billeck joining this edition of the Jet Fuel Podcast for Episode 2. Hoping to see the Winnipeg Jets beat writer and sports reporter of the Winnipeg Sun on the show frequently this season coming up. I feel like he'd be a great guest to come on and inform everyone about what's going on since he covers the team so closely. But yeah, before we get into anything else, shout out to Make Canada Fasteners and Tools, of course, for being one of our official sponsors of GShow Productions and of this Jet Fuel podcast. But also a special shout out to a sponsor that hasn't really been showcased throughout this episode yet, Herico, serving Manitoba producers for over 80 years in the agricultural industry. Terrico.ca is where you can find out more about all their lovely products that they distribute to their Manitoba producers that they work with. But yeah, speaking of Jets training camp, getting into showing you guys the groups here. And that is Team Numminen, who, of course, these groupings for the Jets, they're split up for most of training camp. I know I said the entirety of training camp, but near the end, both these groups are going to come together, and we see on this one the notables, Connor Hellebuck, Dominic DiVincenzo in goal, as well as Colin DeLilia there, and then, of course, Josh Morrissey, Dylan Samberg, Elias Solomonson is also there. Him and Morrissey have been paired up to start off training camps, so we're getting a look at the present and the future of his team on one pairing to start off. And yeah, in terms of the notable forwards here on Team Numminen, in terms of prospects, you got Colby Barlow, Chaz Lucius, who of course coming off of shoulder surgery and hasn't played that much, like me and Scott talked about. Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele in this grouping as well. Gabe Velarde, Nemesnikov, list going on and on there. And then we take a look at Team Solani, who has Thomas Milic and net, Lauren Brossois, making his return to the Winnipeg Jets this season after the Jets signed him in the offseason. On the back end, most notable prospects, Ville Heinola as well as Declan Chisholm. Dylan DeMello, Brendan Dillon being the notables in terms of the returning defenseman, as well as Nate Schmidt. And then on the forward core, of course, Nick Ehlers, who has gone out with a neck spasm injury to start off training camp, dealing with that issue there. But also here, newcomer to the Jets, Iafallo, Cole Perfetti there as well. And yeah, lots of great stuff to look forward to in terms of that. Taking a look at the training camp schedule as provided by the Winnipeg Jets. They started off by skating today. Teams split up into the two teams, of course. They'll be playing in their first preseason game this Sunday coming up on September 24th against the Edmonton Oilers in Edmonton to kick off an all-Canadian games of slate this preseason. And yeah, seems like the groups are going to be coming together more towards the end of training camp. At that October 2nd date in preparation for that Calgary Flames game on October 2nd. Jets finishing off their preseason on October 5th against the Ottawa Senators at 7 p.m. Central Time there. But yeah, getting back into, just news from around the team here as training camp has officially opened for the Winnipeg Jets. Going back to Nikolai Ehlers because, he's dealing with the neck spasms. This is a guy that just seems like he can't catch a break. I'm hoping that it's nothing too serious. Neck spasms, obviously, not as big of a deal as the sports hernia that kept him out for most of the season last year, starting in November, and of course the Hartman hit that wasn't a clean check at all. kept him out for even longer. Ehlers only got to play in one playoff game, and he's so key to this Jets team up front in terms of his success because he's a star. He's an elite player, elite play driver. Say what you want about his defense, but Nikolai Ehlers is one of the best players on this Jets team, and like I already said, in my opinion, the best creator out there on the Jets roster when he is playing in game, and hoping that when he is in the lineup this season, Rick Bowness gives him more opportunity and doesn't limit his ice time like he was last season, playing him with a guy like Adam Lowry on that third line. But yeah, Cole Perfetti, Rick Bowness had some great things to say about him as the Winnipeg Jets head coach. I'm trying to find it here. Was in a scrum yesterday, was being asked questions about the team, and I want to go over some of the things that he said yesterday in that scrum, talking about the early days of preseason, saying every time you get into camp, it's an exciting time. He's looking forward to working with this year's group and the pieces that they brought in. He says doesn't know a lot about the trio coming in of Velarde, Iafallo, and Kupari, saying that the system is different, of course, from where they played in LA to coming to Winnipeg, but loves how the players want to be here. He brought that up as a point. I think that's one worth of noting. And I think that's huge that they want to be here, want to be Winnipeg Jets, because you hear about all the rumors about how, Winnipeg is not a desirable place to play, to have 3 players coming in that are excited to be here. That's great to hear. He also made an interesting note about Kupari, saying they got to figure out where he fits best, saying that he could very well move up in the lineup. Now, I don't think so. I think, me personally, that Kupari could very well be this team's fourth-line centerman, and that would be okay because that's the role he's played in his limited NHL career so far. But he talked about Cole Perfetti as well. Rick Bowness did, saying that the organization drafted him at center, of course, and he was told last season that they want to play him at that position. I'm pretty sure it was last season. I could be wrong on that, but said that with Dubois' spot open, it's going to give Perfetti more of a chance to prove himself in that role, and says that they're going to be giving Perfetti every opportunity to play at center. And I think a good thing to note from Rick Bowness says that it helps that he knows these players now. He knows their tendencies from last year to this year, knows what to look for in their games where they slip a bit, and that's something that he talked about a lot, talking about holding players accountable, putting it on them to correct things once they do talk about those things, which is great. He also talked about pushing this group more this year, saying that's his job as a coach. Speaking about how they were about top 12 in offensive metrics last season, wants to see that boost up. And he also talked about the captaincy, saying that it was the right call to strip Blake Wheeler last year, which I agree with, and I'm sure many Jets fans do, but says it was the right call as it opened up more voices to speak up individually in the locker room, and talked about how there was lots of great candidates, but chose Lowry. The process started last year in terms of finding that future captain for the Jets. Says that, with stripping Blake Wheeler, the complexion in the room changed, and is hoping that Lowry can build off of that, being this year's captain and for the foreseeable future of the Winnipeg Jets. And he also spoke about one last thing to touch on Rick Bowness before we move on here, but says that it's going to be a tough camp, lots of skating. Quoting saying that he says, take all the X's and O's out. You can't do those things if you're not in shape. Says they'll be a hardworking team, wants to play with that pressure as much as they can, and says you can't do that without being in shape, and talked about how there's going to be a lot of battle drills, lots of skating, and says that an email was sent out to the players September 1st to prepare them for another tough camp, to have them expected to be working hard coming into this year's training camp. So lots of great stuff there, and there were also some other Jets players, or players that got to speak, a number of them, and one of those guys was Mark Scheifele. Yeah, and Scheifele, he said that his mindset saying that the new guys coming in is exciting. It's tough to see old faces go, and guys like Blake Wheeler. He spoke about Wheeler and talked about how he was the heart and soul of this team. It's tough not having him here, but it's business at the end of the day. Paraphrasing Mark Scheifele there, wishes him the best, talked about how huge of a mentor that he was to him, means a lot to Scheifele, talked about how he's the best passer that he's ever played with, and said an absolute warrior. We as fans, as the media, didn't know half the things that he went through to just play. So yeah, definitely respect to Blake Wheeler, and he meant a lot to a guy like Mark Scheifele. Was there for Scheifele's whole career as a player on this Winnipeg Jets team. But I think a lot of Jets fans would agree that it was time to move on from Blake Wheeler. Best case scenario was buying him out, and he definitely left his mark. Best player in Jets 2.0 history, but it was definitely time to move on, and Scheifele alluded to that, but it's a business at the end of the day. Talked about how he was also very happy for Adam Lowry, says he'll do a great job in his opinion as the captain of this team, the third in Jets 2.0 history, and it didn't really faze Mark Scheifele not being captain. By the sounds of it, he's focusing on what he can control, and got to question Mark Scheifele on what he said in terms of he wants to work hard, give his heart out every single game, because we haven't seen that from Mark Scheifele in the past number of years. So if he can do that in this contract year for him and prove that he can be a 200-foot player, as he's shown sparingly at times, other times he's kind of dogged it on the back check, would be great to have Mark Scheifele here, being a huge part of the future of this team. And Connor Hellebuyck also had a chance to speak. He said he's excited for this year, had a pretty good summer. He says there's a lot of time to be excited before the season kicks off, basically, and says his mindset has shifted now for going for a cup, saying that he's here to win. It's always been his goal, and he said that, rumors are crazy. The rumors about him over the summer about wanting to go, he says you can't believe everything that you read. He believes that this Jets team can win, and he feels like there's a lot of improvement that he's seen. He feels like they're eager to win, and says that he's going to have an open mind to everything. He's made that clear since day one, says he'll be patient, says that what he says today could change tomorrow. So an open mind from the star goaltender for Winnipeg. He also says that he loves Winnipeg, loves the city. He's an outdoorsman, which he says it fits very well here in Winnipeg, and he loves the fans. And he at the end of the day, for Connor Hellebuyck, he says that he's going to go wherever he feels is the best place to win a cup. He's going to consider, what his family wants, all of those things, and says that, he feels that this team can win, basically. He truly does believe that, and that's great to hear from the Vezina caliber goaltender out of Vezina caliber season last year, being nominated for the award. He also spoke on Brossoit, says he loves having him here. He said it was the first call and message he made the second he saw the signing, to obviously congratulate him. He thinks that he'll push him, to be better. They'll push each other to be better. And he said that he thinks that he will start as many starts as the team needs to succeed, in their opinion. And he said that he's going to do whatever he can to make this team succeed this year coming up. I'll have Hellebuyck mask to show you guys, his new mask, later on in the show. Actually, we'll show that right now. It's pretty cool. His mask designs are always a great thing. This mask design, it kind of features, the stuff he loves, his dog, Tinley, on the front of the chin. As we'll show here, that's his dog, that's the chin of the mask. But yeah, he also has a bass there as well. Designer of the mask, Steve Nash, said, as per CTV, he's into fishing like myself, so he wanted Lake Winnipeg. He got the whole lake on there with some mapping for islands and stuff. We put some water around it, and we put his number in the water. The other side We got a bass because that's what he enjoys fishing for, said Steve Nash, the mask designer and owner of Eye Candy Air in Ontario. So some cool news there out of the Winnipeg Jets goaltender, him getting a new mask this season, being ready to go for 2023-2024. But speaking of guys like Cole Perfetti, a guy like Dylan Samberg, and Jets' potential line combinations this season, joining me next is going to be Evan Samoiloff to talk about all of that, coming up here on the Jet Fuel podcast for episode 2 on GShow Productions. You won't want to miss it, folks. Joining me on this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast once again for another week is Evan Samoiloff. You joined me last week to talk about Jets prospects, their upcoming preseason, which starts this Sunday night. Very exciting times, of course. And talking about rig bonus as well. This week, we're going to be talking about individual players as well, some other good stuff. Ev, how you doing on this Wednesday night, man? The night before this or on this Tuesday night, the night before the podcast airs.
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be back on your podcast, and I think tonight's edition is going to be super exciting. There's going to be lots of fun stuff to talk about with the Winnipeg Jets, and honestly, I'm just excited for training camp to start and for the season to get underway.
Yeah, training camp will be starting in 2 days' time, under 48 hours away at this time of the recording. But let's get into it. A player that's looking to have a breakout year, I'd say, Cole Perfetti. He's dealt with injury so far in the 2 seasons of his young NHL career. Played 51 games last year in what was considered his true rookie season. 31 points. He had 8 goals, 22 assists there. He's a high-level playmaker, Evan. We know all about how good Cole Perfetti is, but your expectations for him heading into this season?
Yeah, so I'm honestly very excited. Obviously, the big thing is for him to stay healthy. We've seen every season that he's been in the NHL that he's ended up being hurt for long stretches of time. So health is the number one thing. Obviously, it's hard to predict injuries. It's hard, it's hard for a player to be constantly injured all the time. So if he's able to stay healthy, I think he's going to have a monster year. Again, do just look at the player profile with a guy like Perfetti. This is a guy that played center mostly in juniors with the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL. In his rookie year, playing on the Saginaw Spirit, he got 74 points in 63 games. Like, he's averaging more than a point per game his rookie year. Then he follows that up by getting 111 points in 61 games the following year after that, before coming over to the Manitoba Moose. And he did that all while playing center. And I know we're going to talk about this on whether Cole Perfetti should transition over to center in the NHL or continue to stay on the wing. We've seen him on the wing that he is a very good defensive forward. You see it with all the metrics, with all the stats, anything you want to look at. Cole Perfetti in the NHL has been one of the Jets' better defensive forwards on the ice, especially in 5-on-5 situations. So I think him transitioning over to center, I think it'll actually elevate his game and he will turn into an elite two-way player down the line.
Yeah, and that's the big question heading into this year's training camp. It's already been talked about previously on the show, but who's going to fill that second line center need? I mean, we even talked about it last week too, right? I think Perfetti has a great shot at it because they drafted him as a centerman. The Jets looking for that answer. At number 2, Cole Perfetti could very well be that guy. Like I mentioned, 51 games played last year, 31 points, 8 goals, 22 assists. Now, this isn't a guy that shoots a lot. I think he needs to look to take that next level this season in terms of being more confident in shooting that puck. But at the same time, he's such a high-level playmaker that he's always looking to make that extra pass, that sneaky pass that teams may not be expecting. He is very good positionally, like you said, reliable in his own end, and he's a very good possession player too. Looking at his career so far throughout the first 2 seasons he's played in the NHL, 53.2% Corsi for percentage. So the big thing for him this season is, can he stay healthy? I feel like a lot of work probably went into upping his durability, getting stronger in the gym heading into this year. How he's going to look, along the boards taking hits is going to be an interesting thing this year. But this guy has all the skills in his toolbox to take his game to the next level. And, if he shoots that puck a bit more, he was shooting around 9% last year. He only had the 8 goals, but if he does that more, continues to make the high playmaking plays that he has, creating like he has, I could see Cole Perfetti going for 60, maybe even 70 points this season if he stays in the lineup consistently, because his health will be the biggest concern, of course.
Yeah, and I like the point you made up about him, playing winger, having to battle along the boards, get into the dirty areas. I think him transitioning to center will actually help in that aspect because you see it in both of his injuries. It was always along the boards on a board battle or him getting hit along the boards. Him, covering the slot in the center position. I think that'll be very beneficial for a guy like Cole Perfetti, who isn't the biggest guy. He's not the guy you want in front of the net, tipping pucks. He's definitely the playmaking type. And like you said before, yeah, there's a couple times where he has a nice shot in the slot or has a high danger scoring chance to shoot, and he likes to be a little creative and make an extra pass or make an extra move. I do agree. I think his shot is underrated. I think he does have a pretty decent shot onto him. And honestly, I think if he's able to fix that part of his game, and I don't even hate it. I like a player that's more patient than not. But I just think that if you play him with the correct line mates, which we will get into shortly, I think he will excel in the center position with the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing that he's looking for that extra pass to get creative all the time. Just sometimes, like you said, he has that open shot. You'd like to see a player take it like that. But I like the point you brought up in terms of, taking him away from that wing position, playing him at center, maybe not tasking him with having to go through those board battles as much. And like you said, banking on his defensive ability. We know the centerman is the player with the most responsibility in his own end. So, like you said, I think that could elevate his game even more so if he does play center. And I think we're going to expect to see, in my opinion at least, a complete 200-foot game from Cole Perfetti, putting up good results both offensively and defensively coming into this year. A guy that's also heading into another year in his young NHL career is Dylan Samberg, the Winnipeg Jets defenseman, signed a 2-year deal to stay in Winnipeg this summer. This is a guy that I feel like got stronger as the season progressed last year. Evan, sure, there were some hiccups in his game, some blunders like in that series against Vegas in the playoffs, but the positives far outweigh the negatives in his game. This is a guy that, with the big body he has, maybe you like to see him get more physical. He only had 91 hits in the over 60 games he played last year, but this is a guy that's not afraid to sacrifice the body, getting into shot lanes, blocking 93 shots last year. He's a guy that I feel is pretty reliable, steady most times in his own end, and a good possession player too, and a guy that makes solid passes pretty often. So I'm expecting for him to take the next step this year. I like to see him maybe add some more offense to his game, but if this guy can lock down and be a defensive first reliable player for the Jets, especially at the size he's at, while getting more physical, I think the sky's the limit for him here in this season and coming up next year as well.
So Samberg recently signed a 2-year, $2.8 million contract. So he's locked up for the next 2 years for the Winnipeg Jets. And I think that's great value. It's a great value for a guy that's making 1.4 million a season. And I think this is a very important, point in his career to establish himself as a top 4 defenseman coming up on his final year of RFA ability. This is a guy where as the season went on, you could tell that he got more confident. You can tell that, the more he was playing, the more ice time he got, the better he was getting as the year went on. And of course, like any rookie or I guess young player in general, they're going to be making mistakes and, they're going to learn from it. And one thing I noticed from Samberg is that he was noticeable in all the right ways by not making big mistakes, by making the clean and easy play. And he has a good mix of size, physicality. He's actually a really smooth skater for how big he is. And he's pretty good in the transition game. He's able to move the puck out pretty nicely for a big guy. And I think that these next 2 years coming up are going to be pivotal because, with guys coming up on UFA deals, you have guys like Brendan Dillon, you have Dylan DeMello coming up, you got Nate Schmidt coming up in a couple years. You're going to need to fill some holes. And I think Samberg fills a pretty nice hole in that Jets top 4 down the line.
Yeah, I agree. I could see him taking that next step, even as this season goes along, playing himself into a top four pairing situation, being the Jets' second left defenseman on that second pairing. But yeah, I think that, like you said, he got more comfortable as the season went along last year. Like you said, one of the Jets' best defensemen coming down the stretch. And I think that the more he gets comfortable, the more we're going to see his physicality go up in terms of the hit. Only 91 last year. I see him in the triple digits this year. This isn't a guy, like I said, that's afraid to, sacrifice his body in his own end. And more times than not, he's been pretty reliable in the transition game and good in that aspect of things. Not sure how big of an offensive threat he's going to be throughout his career, but would definitely be nice to see him add on parts of his game there in terms of getting solid shots on net to create opportunities in the offensive zone as time goes along. So should be interesting. They got him on a cheap deal. He's affordable right now and has a lot of room to improve still. And I think he can to solidify himself into the top four of this Jets team.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess another thing with Samberg is that he spent a lot of the season playing with a bunch of different defensemen. You had him swapping with partners like with Neil Pionk and Nate Schmidt. I thought him and Nate Schmidt were probably the best pairing that he was with. That's where he put up the best numbers. I think once he's able to find an established role, because you saw a lot of mix matching last year with the defense. You saw players flipping in and out of the lineup, and of course you still had Stanley and Capobianco in the picture as well. But I think now that he's officially established, I just think he will just continue to improve, and he will be a solid defenseman coming into this year.
Would be nice, especially with what the uncertainty is of Brendan Dillon staying here, as he's currently in the Jets' top four on that left side, per dailyfaceoffs.com. But getting into the Jets forward group now, Evan, this is a team that I've brought up the forward group many times on this show already, but on paper, they look to have the same high-level offensive first line projected to be in Connor, Scheifele, and Ehlers. I feel like they're going to have more reliability in their own end this year, and there's more depth, especially down that left wing side. Iafallo, I think, being a key piece in that, allowing that to happen, and Niederreiter being there, of course, too. But what are your expectations for this Jets forward core going into the season, and some line combinations that you could see them rolling with this year?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the question is the Jets roster right now better than the roster of last season? And if I had to give my opinion on it, I think that they're slightly better as a total group from before, because you basically subtract Blake Wheeler and Pierre-Luc Dubois as your two main forwards that are gone. We won't include like Kevin Stenlin and all those, all like the fringe fourth line, extra guys. But then you add a guy like Gabe Vilardi, who has the potential to be a very good top six centerman of the future. You add in Alex Iafallo, who is honestly a very good depth guy, especially if he's going to be in your top nine or bottom six kind of role. Then you get Rasmus Kupari, who is, of course, a wild card. He's most likely just going to be a bottom six guy, but there could be a little bit of upside there, former first round pick. But I think the line combinations will be interesting because you look at kind of the top 12 names and you could honestly like pick a name from a hat. And I feel like the coaching staff would not mind that at all. I feel like the team is constructed in a way where you could run something where you run two elite players on one line, then have like a complementary piece on the next line. So for an example, like if you wanted to run Scheifele and Connor again, it's been publicly known that Scheifele wants to play with Kyle Connor. Instead of putting an elite player beside him with Ehlers, even though I would not be opposed to it, that was one of the best lines in the NHL when they had their short little stint before Ehlers got injured. You could put a guy like a Morgan Barron or an Alex Iafallo to balance out, the high offense with the defense. But based on what you've seen in camp, I kind of do like the line of Connor, Scheifele, Vilardi, because let's be real, Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele are not good defensively. You can call it might just be, they don't try, they're lazy, but what we've seen from a large sample size is that they are horrendous in their own end. Gabe Vilardi, is probably the Jets' best defensive forward on this team. He played on a team on LA. Like, come on, LA is notorious for having great defensive forwards. And you can even add in Alex Iafallo as well, who probably fits right in there with one of the Jets' better defensive forwards. So I think Gabe Vilardi being on that line, I think will actually be really good. You're playing alongside two elite goal scorers, two elite offensive players on a bridge deal where you're going to be the one that's kind of going to have most of the defensive responsibility. But I think that's going to be a good thing for him, especially leading up to his next contract. And I think that line is going to be really fun if they do end up going into the season. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that line could be a lot of fun. Like you said, you get the defense to supplement the two high level offensive players in Connor and Shifley. I think the big question I have is, does Bonus want to put three of his potential top goal scorers on the same line together in that aspect of things? I still think that Nikolai Ehlers coming in on that second line, if he were to play there, is looking to have a big year and could definitely put the puck in the net. I believe he was close to 30 a few years ago. But yeah, I would like to see a line combination like that. But say they do stay with Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Ehlers as that first line. I think a nice second line could be Nino Niederreiter along with Cole Perfetti and Gabe Vilardi, the way that Niederreiter is able to score and do the little things right like he does. You got that playmaker with a solid defense on that second line in Cole Perfetti, and not to mention a good defensive player in Vilardi who can also bring that offense on that second line for the Jets in that top six. And then you got a guy like who I have on paper here, Iafallo, Lowry, and Appleton on that third line. You know, three players that are all reliable in their own end. You still have the ability to also have some offense there in Iafallo, but I could also see the Jets going with Iafallo on that second line along with Perfetti and Vilardi, knowing that Vilardi and Iafallo coming from LA, maybe there could be some chemistry there. And you see what Niederreiter did with Lowry and Appleton last year, being a good addition on that line when he was playing there. I just feel like the combinations for the Jets are endless in this top nine this season coming up. And, you know, even on the fourth line, I like the way it's set right now with Morgan Barron, Kupari, and Nemesnikov, because you got Morgan Barron who brings that high energy, as well as Rasmus Kupari, who brings that reliability in the face-off circle, and then Nemesnikov, who's a good complementary piece, especially on a fourth line that does all the little things right. So I think any way you spin it, this Jets forward group is enticing in terms of the line combinations that they could go with, and I'm excited to see what Bonus figures out quickly here in preseason with these lines.
Yeah, for sure. And you see it with early on with Bonus as well, that the blender came out quite a bit. You know, you had games where you had players switching from third line to first line, second line, if you want to call it like top line, second line, third line. You had players that were rotating in and out in many different positions, many different spots. Like you saw Nemestikov play second line center last year. And so, you know, I just think the combinations are it's going to be fun to watch. But I think if you want to get off to a hot start and you want to solidify yourself, I think what I would do personally is that I would just run the top six like it was last year with, you know, the top line of Connor, Scheifele, Ehlers. That's already been proven to be an elite line, one of the best top lines in the NHL. I would run that right off the bat, in my opinion. Then you can run a line of either Vilardi or Perfetti at center, then put the other one on the wing alongside Nino Niederreiter. Niederreiter, you know, he's had 7 straight 20-goal seasons. Like, you know, I don't think people really realize like how great of an offensive player Nino Niederreiter is, because, you know, he was only here for half a season last year, and I thought he was great for the half a season we did have him. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he does with a full season, especially if he's going to play with one of the elite talents on the Jets. And then for the bottom six, you know, I would just run it kind of like how they did last year. You know, obviously Lowry and Appleton seem to be a pair. Personally, I like a guy like Nemestikov and Barron more than Appleton, but just for kind of realistic sake, it would probably be something like Iafallo, Lowry, Appleton, and then the fourth line of Barron, Kupari, Nemestikov. But the one thing I like is that it's very interchangeable. If you need a more defensive approach, you can line balance a bit more. If there's a certain matchup that you want, whether you want a full defensive line to match up against a team's top line, you're able to do that. If you want to exploit, having a really elite top line go against another elite top line, that's fine as well. So I think it's going to be super exciting to see what the combinations are coming into camp.
So I see you agreed with my first set of line combinations there. Hey, you like those? But yeah, I think that the point about Lowry and Appleton playing together, I feel like that's something that Rick Bowness went to a lot last season. And in terms of the Jets having that all defensive type of third line, I feel like Appleton and Lowry fit well together in that aspect. Obviously, I'd like to see some more scoring throughout that part of the lineup, and we'll see what a guy like Iafallo could do. Maybe they even put Nino Niederreiter back there, but yeah, I'm in agreement with rolling with the first line they have on paper right now, having Nino Niederreiter playing on that second line. And like you said, underrated scorer, a guy that consistently scores 20 goals, a guy that can drive the play, and a guy that, is reliable in both ends of the ice, does the little things well. But I'd be excited to see what a guy like Iafallo could bring to that third line, bringing even more offense than they had last year in that position. With the 14 goals he had, he was on pace for 19. And adding that with his good defensive ability, with an already defensive-minded mind in Adam Lowry and Appleton, could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I would say the only issue with running a lineup like that is that you're very top heavy. You don't really have many great, offensive playmakers in the bottom six. Iafallo, of course, he's the big new addition. I think he would probably be the best of the offensive players in that bottom six if you ran a very heavy top six. And that's kind of the big issue, right? Do you really want, a Lowry Appleton duo as your third line, going into the postseason if the Jets do end up making the playoffs? I think if you're gonna run a bottom six like that, I think you have to at least, get some talent with each other. So if you're gonna run Lowry and Appleton together, that's totally fine, but run them as like a complete shutdown pairing, and then put guys like Iafallo and put guys like Morgan Barron, who I think has a little bit of offensive upside together. So that's kind of my only issue with the bottom six, is that you can't be going stretches of 40 games and not scoring a goal. You can't be going through multiple months of the bottom six, contributing one goal every couple games. Like, you see the elite teams in the NHL, they got to produce offense. And I think Iafallo will help in that bottom six, but is it going to be enough? I'm not 100% sure. That's why you got to hope that a guy like Morgan Barron's able to take the next step, or maybe Rasmus Kupari can come into his zone and provide a little bit of offense. But if there's one weak spot in that Jets forward group, I think it's just going to be, again, same thing every year, is that we're going to have to find some secondary scoring, and Iafallo will help, but is it going to be enough help for the stretches that the Jets went on last year?
Yeah, and I think what could be interesting is maybe you play Iafallo on that second line along with Perfetti and Gabe Vilardi. You still got some high offensive qualities in a guy like Vilardi along with Perfetti. Iafallo could be that good complementary piece. But I've seen what the Jets have on paper, at least per daily faceoffs, is having Nino Niederreiter on that third line. Now, I think he is a top six level player, but that could be good in terms of boosting the offense for this Winnipeg Jets team on that third line. And like you said, you're so right in terms of, that was a line last year that was going through droughts and going scoreless. And that was a problem with the Jets last year, was that bottom six. But the options they have at their disposal this year, heading into the 2023-2024 season, I feel like there's a lot more room to interchange guys like we talked about and make different line combinations work.
Yeah, and that's why for me personally, I'm not a big fan of just loading up the top six. I kind of like line balancing and getting complementary players alongside two really good players. I'm just saying, like, if you want to run your best possible top six, load up those two top lines, because that top line is going to produce, as they've shown with, a pretty good track record of being one of the best lines in hockey.
Oh, no doubt about it, man. It's going to be exciting to see what this season brings in terms of that, what this forward group is going to look like for the Jets. I feel like there could be more balanced throughout the lineup, which is nice depending on how the Jets spin it. But leave your thoughts in the comments, everybody, what you would like to see the Jets forward pairings being this year, or I guess the line pairings up front, line pairings, forward groups, the
Yeah.
line combinations for the Jets. You
Yeah,
got
one of those works.
one of those words works. And yeah, it was fun going to work with this guy tonight, talking about the Winnipeg Jets on the Jet Fuel podcast for episode 2, brought to you by Make Canada Fasteners and Tools and Terrico. Evan Samoiloff, my good buddy. Thanks for coming on, Ev, and we'll talk to you coming up here soon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, and I'm always available if you need me.
Oh, of course, man. I know you will be. I'll be in your line. And Evan Samoiloff, my good buddy, joined me on this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast for episode 2. Had a lot of fun talking about Cole Perfetti, who Murad Eights, Jets writer for The Athletic, brought up an interesting comparison between him and Paul Stastny, talking about how, it's comparable in terms of how both reliable players, Perfetti looking to be that solid presence in both ends of the ice this season if he were to play center. And yeah, adding on to Cole Perfetti, I think that for him, he's a guy that makes every single player on his line better and creates so much offense in terms of his high IQ and his ability to make, those big time passes, those sneaky passes like talked about. But yeah, I'm excited to see how these Jets lines pan out. Now, these aren't set in stone. This is just the start of training camp, and it makes sense that the lines are this way because these players are grouped with each other in this way. So maybe some thinking went into that in terms of what the Jets want to see to start off the way they made these two teams, Team Numminen and Team Solani. And yeah, I think that going back to what me and Scott Billeck were talking about in the show, I think the questions really lie in terms of who those depth players are going to be right on this roster, looking to compete for spots. In terms of a guy like Axel Jonsson-Fjällby, Scott had also mentioned a guy like Jansen Harkins, who always has a good training camp, always shows out there, but isn't quite able to sustain that throughout the season. Jansen Harkins, that is. But in terms of defense, like for depth defensemen, I feel like me and Scott talked about, this D-core is pretty much set. Not much is probably going to change, if at all anything there, even though I'm not a fan of guys like Pionk and a guy like Nate Schmidt. At the end of the day, Nate Schmidt paired up with a guy in Dylan Samberg, it seems like, and we talked about, me and Evan, that was a guy that Evan talked about how they were solid as a pairing. That was probably who Samberg played the best with last season. So yeah, not a big fan of Logan Stanley. I'd like to see him not on this team. A guy like Declan Chisholm, if he has a strong training camp, who knows what could happen. Salamonson, a lot of people high on him, but he's still young. I feel like he's going to have an impressive camp, but does that mean he makes the roster? Who knows? Who knows coming up here? But a guy like Declan Chisholm, would he be, in a solid spot to succeed and continue to develop if he makes the team as a depth defenseman? I feel like he'd be better off playing as a regular in an NHL lineup if that was the case. But yeah, in terms of Rick Bowness, he had a chance to speak about the Jets forward group, what their lines are going to be to start off. Let's take a listen.
We've got to figure out where they're going to fit best. We're going to start training camp with Gabe on right wing, with Mark and KC, and see how that works. We'll start Alex with Lau and Apple, and we'll see how that works. And and Erasmus will start in the center on that fourth line. But again, he may move up. We don't know a lot about him because he wasn't used a lot in LA. So we're going to give all those three a great opportunity to find the chemistry with the right guys. But we're certainly going to give Rasmus a lot more ice time so we can figure out exactly what we have to work with.
And that was Rick Bowness speaking yesterday, day one of Jets training camp. Camp really opened today with the first couple of skates that both teams, Team Solani and Team Numminen, were in. And yeah, it seems like they are excited to have Velarde paired with Scheifele and Connor to start off to see how that works out. And I'd love to see that line together if it does make sense, with Vilardi bringing that really good defensive play as well as the offensive touch there. Like me and Evan talked about, it's just a question of throughout the season, do you want three of your potential best goal scorers on the same line together? But at the same time, it does create that opportunity for maybe Scheifele and Connor to be playing even more freely offensively. I think what's interesting too is a guy like Nemesnikov. Could we see him, move up and down the lineup playing on line 2? He's not in the same group as Adam Lowry. He's in that group of Scheifele as well as guys like Vilardi, playing with who he's slotted on to play with in his fourth line in Morgan Barron and Rasmus Kupari. So that's going to be interesting. As for Mason Appleton, I'm not the biggest fan of his game offensively. I do think that he's more of a fourth line guy at the end of the day, but it seems like the Jets, like I've already said, really like the pairing of him and Lowry together on that shutdown line. So as of right now, the Jets lines heading into training camp to start off are Connor, Scheifele, and Vilardi on the top line, Ehlers, Perfetti, and Niederreiter on the second line. Of course, Ehlers is going to miss some time at this point with those neck spasms. But on the third line, we got Iafallo, Lowry, and Appleton, Morgan Barron, Kupari, and Nemesnikov on that fourth line. And the deep pairings haven't changed heading into this season. We got Morrissey, DeMello together, Brendan Dillon and Neil Pionk together, and Dylan Samberg and Nate Schmidt together. And of course, Hellebuck and Brossoit are projected to be the starting goaltenders on this team in terms of the top two. So yeah, going to talk more about that coming up in next week's episode, about the first couple preseason games the Jets have had, as well as how training camp is going. Going to bring you guys more quotes, more talk from the Jets staff as well as the players. And should be a lot of fun. But thank you to Mid-Canada Fasteners and Tools, as well as Terraco for sponsoring this edition of the Jet Fuel Podcast. This is just about going to do it for this edition of the show. I just want to say some final words here. I've been your host, Graham, the GShow Forsyth. If you tuned into this one, be sure to subscribe and leave and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes like this coming to the network. We'll return with the Jet Fuel Podcast for episode 3 next week on Wednesday, so that should be a lot of fun. Special thanks to Evan Samoiloff and Scott Billeck for joining me on this week's edition of the show. It was a lot of fun talking to those guys, and also a special thanks to Nico Feniak, of course, for producing the music, the intro, and the outro, as you guys will hear, of the Jet Fuel Podcast here on GShow Productions. To end things off, we got an exciting night ahead of us. The Pilot Mount Hockey Academy Podcast, the Buffaloes Podcast, returns for episode 2 at 9 p.m. Central Time live on the channel. So if you are listening or watching, I should say, be sure to tune into that. This episode will be available later on Spotify. So if you want to listen to it, you will be able to do that on the GShow Productions Spotify page. And yeah, the True Blue Podcast, our official Winnipeg Blue Bombers podcast, comes out tomorrow. Taylor Allen of the Winnipeg Free Press joins me on that show this week to talk about the Bombers as they are on a bye week, taking on the Toronto Argonauts next. Not going to have any tailgating in that episode once again, since I was feeling under the weather, had no time to really do it, and I got a busy day tomorrow in preparation for that episode. I got some schoolwork to finish as well. So yeah, tailgating will be for sure returning next week on that edition of the True Blue Podcast. But for you Jets fans out there, out in Jets Nation, leave your thoughts in the comments about what you think the line combination should be for the Jets this year, what your preferred one should be. What you expect from the team this season. Do you expect playoffs? Do you expect them to miss? And yeah, just your thoughts about, the contracts that have been signed by Barlow and Chisholm, and your thoughts on Nikolai Ehlers as well. How big of a blow that is for the Jets this year. A lot of stuff that we talked about tonight, as well as leave your thoughts on who you think the Jets' second-line centerman should be. Looking to be Cole Perfetti at this point, but that could very much change as training camp rolls along. But that's all for me, folks. love to hear from you in the comments, and would love to hear from you guys in the live stream next week, because we'll be back Wednesday night next week at 9 p.m. Central Time for an all-new edition of the Jet Fuel Podcast. Until then, I've been your host, Graham the GShow Forsyth, giving you the peace out, the salute, and saying so long on this Thursday night. And have a wonderful rest of your Thursday night. Take care, everybody. See you next Wednesday.